The silence of the night was interrupted by the distant sound of hurried footsteps echoing through the deserted streets of a sleeping city. A man, his face marked by panic, ran without looking back, as if fleeing from an invisible predator. His lungs burned with every breath, and in his chest, fear grew like a shadow, suffocating and relentless. He knew he was being followed, but he didn't dare look at the unknown pursuer chasing him. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps vanished. The man stopped, gasping, trying to control his erratic heartbeat. What followed was a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the city's sounds. He took a hesitant step forward, attempting to convince himself that he was safe. But the security he sought was a cruel illusion. Without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows, moving with the speed of a specter. Before the man could cry for help, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth, and the cold gleam of a blade was the last thing his eyes saw. Life slipped away from his body as the mysterious figure held him, murmuring words lost in the night wind. As blood stained the ground, the masked vigilante stood up, wiping the blade on a dark cloth. There was no emotion in his movements, only a mechanical precision, as if taking the life of a criminal was a routine task. He glanced at the fallen body for a brief moment before disappearing back into the shadows, leaving behind only the corpse and a mystery that would soon shake the city. On the other side of the city, Detective Lucas Araujo woke up startled from a nightmare that seemed to be becoming a reality. The news about the masked vigilante had become frequent, and the tension in the police department increased with each new body found. But something in the back of his mind told him that this was more than just a case of vigilante justice. There was something deeply wrong with that figure acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Lucas knew the investigation would lead him down dangerous paths, where the line between justice and vengeance became increasingly blurred. And as he plunged into the abyss of that enigma, he began to realize that to capture the vigilante, he would have to face not just a criminal but the demons of his own past. Demons he had buried, but that now threatened to resurface, bringing with them a truth that could destroy everything he believed in. The deeper Lucas delved into the case, the more he found himself entangled in a web of secrets intertwining the fates of several people. The vigilante was not just a man seeking justice. He was the product of an even darker story, where the lines of good and evil crossed in unexpected ways. Every clue the detective uncovered led to a new enigma, and the feeling that he was always one step behind grew with each passing day. And as Lucas drew closer to the truth, he began to wonder, did he really want to discover the vigilante's identity? Or could the truth he sought be the catalyst for something far worse than he ever imagined? Time seemed to drag on as Detective Lucas Araujo immersed himself in the old police department files. The cold coffee beside him and the piles of documents scattered across the table were signs of the time he had already dedicated to the case. Photos of crime scenes, confused testimonies, and reports detailing the brutality of the vigilante's attacks were everywhere. But among the time-yellowed pages, something began to catch his attention, a pattern that had, until then, gone unnoticed by everyone. The vigilante's first targets were notorious criminals, men whose crimes had shocked the city and who, in some way, had escaped justice. But by cross-referencing information, Lucas realized that in each case there was a common element, a name that appeared in the background, like a shadow, someone who always seemed to be present but was never the focus of investigations. This name, always mentioned in an indirect context, belonged to someone who had never been suspected of any crime, Ricardo Morera. Ricardo was a renowned lawyer, known for his ability to defend seemingly lost cases. His brilliant career was marked by successes where others had failed, and he was respected by many, but hated by those who believed he manipulated justice in favor of the guilty. However, his constant presence in the shadows of each case intrigued Lucas. How could a seemingly well-intentioned lawyer always be indirectly linked to each of the vigilante's victims? The detective's curiosity turned into obsession. He began to follow Ricardo's steps, studying every move, analyzing every case the lawyer had defended in recent years. And the more he investigated, the more a disturbing truth emerged. All of Ricardo's clients who had been murdered by the vigilante had something in common. They were all guilty of heinous crimes, but had been acquitted due to technicalities or lack of evidence. And Ricardo was always at the center of these acquittals. Lucas began to suspect that Ricardo knew more than he let on. Could he be the masked vigilante? Or perhaps someone close to him? Someone who shared his distorted view of justice? The sleepless nights and the relentless review of documents began to weigh on the detective. He felt he was getting close to something big, but the fear that the truth might be more complex than he imagined grew with each new discovery. Finally, Lucas decided it was time to confront Ricardo. One night, after following the lawyer to a luxury restaurant where he dined alone, the detective waited patiently for him to leave. When Ricardo finally exited the establishment, Lucas approached him, his heart racing. Without mincing words, he confronted the lawyer, mentioning the cases, the patterns he had noticed, and finally questioned him about his possible connection to the vigilante. Ricardo, however, remained unfazed. He looked Lucas directly in the eyes with an unsettling calm and smiled. "You've been working hard, detective," he said, his voice low and controlled. "But sometimes, the truth isn't something you find, it's something you create." Those words, enigmatic and full of double meaning, echoed in Lucas's mind as the lawyer walked away, leaving the detective standing alone under the yellow glow of the streetlight. That night marked a turning point. Lucas couldn't sleep, Ricardo's words playing over and over in his mind. The truth was something he created? What did that mean? Could it be that Lucas himself was being manipulated, led to believe in something that didn't exist? Or was Ricardo simply trying to divert his attention from the true identity of the vigilante? With these disturbing questions, Lucas realized the case was far from solved. And what he didn't know was that while he struggled to piece together the puzzle, the vigilante was preparing for his next move, an act that would forever change the course of the investigation, and the detective's own life. The city, enveloped in an unsettling darkness, seemed to breathe in a different rhythm that night. Something was about to happen, something that would irreversibly alter the course of Lucas Araujo's investigation. He knew he was at a crossroads, where any wrong decision could lead to disaster. But despite the doubt gnawing at his mind, Lucas was driven by an irresistible impulse to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. As he pondered Ricardo Moreira's enigmatic words, a new message arrived on his phone. It was an urgent notification, directly from the police command. A new body had been found, and all indications were that the vigilante had struck again. The detective wasted no time. He grabbed his gun, donned his coat, and headed to the crime scene, an abandoned building in the city center where the remnants of past urban glory mingled with the decay of a bygone era. Upon arriving at the scene, Lucas was met with a macabre sight. The body of a man, hanging by the neck, swung slowly in the wind, suspended from one of the building's rusted beams. The wide eyes and expression of sheer terror on the victim's face indicated that he knew exactly what was coming before he died. On the ground beneath the body, a message written in blood caught everyone's attention. "Justice has finally found you." A chill ran down Lucas's spine. The vigilante's signature was darker than ever, but there was something different about this scene. Something that felt personal. He approached the body to inspect it more closely, and when he turned the victim's face, his heart nearly stopped. It was Marcos Oliveira, a former police officer who had been fired on charges of corruption and involvement with organized crime. A man Lucas knew well, as he had been the one to investigate and testify against him in court years before. Lucas's head swirled with questions. Why had the vigilante chosen Marcos? And why now? The answer, he knew, lay somewhere in the past, a past that Lucas had tried to leave behind. But the more he tried to avoid the ghosts of that time, the closer they seemed to come, surrounding him on all sides. Marcos was more than just a victim. He was a link in a chain that Lucas was beginning to realize connected all of the vigilante's crimes to a darker, more personal purpose. As the forensic team began to work the scene, Lucas stepped away, trying to process the information flooding his mind like the pieces of a distorted puzzle. Ricardo Moreira, the vigilante, Marcos Oliveira, all were connected in some way, but how? Lucas knew he was running out of time. If he didn't solve the riddle soon, someone else would die. And judging by the vigilante's actions, that someone could be closer to him than he imagined. Determined to find answers, Lucas decided to return to the department and review all of Ricardo's cases, looking for connections that might have gone unnoticed. However, upon arriving at his office, he found something that made him stop in his tracks. His desk was in disarray, papers scattered everywhere, and in the midst of the mess, a manila envelope caught his attention. On its surface, only one word was written: confession. Lucas opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found a handwritten letter with elegant and precise penmanship. As he read, his heart began to race. The letter was a detailed confession of the vigilante's crimes, but what truly sent chills down Lucas's spine was the signature at the end: Ricardo Moreira. The lawyer was taking credit for all the murders, but something in those words didn't sound right. There was a calculated coldness in the way the crimes were described, as if each detail had been chosen to provoke a specific reaction. And then, in the final paragraph, came the revelation that made the ground beneath Lucas's feet crumble. Ricardo wasn't just confessing. He was challenging the detective. The letter ended with an address and a time set for the following night. "Come alone, Lucas," the letter said. "It's time to confront your own demons." Lucas knew he was walking into a trap, but the need to face the truth drove him to accept the challenge. And as night approached, he prepared for the encounter that could determine not only the vigilante's fate but his own. With his gun loaded and his heart full of doubts, Lucas set out for the designated address. What awaited him that night would be a final confrontation, where masks would be removed, revealing the true face of justice and revenge. But deep down, Lucas knew that the greatest battle would be against himself, against the choices he had made and the truths he preferred to ignore. The clock struck the exact hour when he arrived at the location, an old, abandoned factory on the verge of collapse. The darkness was almost complete, except for a faint light glowing in the distance. And there, under that solitary light, Lucas saw Ricardo Moreira standing, waiting for him. The lawyer smiled as he saw him, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome, Lucas," Ricardo said calmly. "I knew you would come." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat as he saw Ricardo Moreira under the dim light that illuminated the old factory. The silence in the place was oppressive. Every sound seemed amplified, as if the very environment was waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The detective kept his hand close to his holstered weapon, his eyes fixed on the lawyer, who watched him with unsettling calm. "Why here, Ricardo? Why now?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but the nervousness was evident. Ricardo took a step forward, the sound of his shoes echoing off the empty walls. "Because this is where it all began, Lucas, and this is where it all ends." Lucas frowned, confused. "Began? What are you talking about?" The lawyer stopped a few meters from the detective, his face partially obscured by shadows. "Do you really think this is just another case, Lucas? Do you think I'm doing this for justice, for revenge? You've always been good at following clues, but this time you missed the most important one." Lucas's mind raced, searching for any memory that could link this place to something relevant, but nothing came to mind. He was about to ask more when Ricardo, seeing the confusion on his face, continued. "Let me refresh your memory then," Ricardo said, his tone dark. "Many years ago, you arrested a man you believed to be guilty, but who was actually framed by others. He was just a pawn in the dirty game of much more powerful people. And you, with your sense of justice, condemned him without hesitation." A chill ran down Lucas's spine as he heard those words. He began to vaguely remember a case from many years ago, a case involving high-level corruption and a controversial arrest. But even so, he couldn't make the connection to what Ricardo was implying. "His name was Samuel Moreira," Ricardo said, with bitterness that seemed to corrode every word. "My father." The impact of the revelation hit Lucas like a punch to the stomach. He remembered Samuel Moreira, a case that had been widely covered in the media at the time. A businessman who was imprisoned for allegedly being involved in a scheme to divert public funds. Lucas had been involved in the investigations, firmly believing that Samuel was guilty. But now, faced with Ricardo, doubt began to grow. I didn't know," Lucas murmured, still trying to process the information. "I believed he was guilty." Ricardo shook his head with a sad smile. "You believed what they wanted you to believe. My father was innocent, but no one cared to investigate deeply. And because of that, he died in prison, a broken and dishonored man." The anger that Ricardo had suppressed for years spilled over into his voice, and Lucas felt the weight of guilt bearing down on him. The pieces finally began to fit together. The reason Ricardo had become what he was, the vigilante who eliminated those who escaped justice. He was on a path of revenge, not just for others, but for his own father. "So that's it," Lucas said with a heavy voice. "All of this was to avenge your father's death." "Not just that," Ricardo replied, his eyes glowing with a cold intensity. "It was to expose the rot of the system you represent. A system that fails to protect the innocent and allows the guilty to escape. And you, Lucas, were the face of that system. Someone had to do what was necessary, and I took on that role." The detective felt a mix of anger and compassion. He understood Ricardo's pain, but couldn't ignore the methods he had chosen. "Do you think killing these people will bring your father back?" or that it will correct the injustices of the past. Ricardo took a step back as if Lucas's words had struck him. No, Lucas, I know my father will never come back. But this isn't about the past. It's about the future. A future where the powerful can no longer corrupt justice, where the innocent don't pay for the sins of others. Silence fell between them for a moment, heavy with the weight of everything that had been said. Lucas knew he had to act, but something held him back. Ricardo wasn't just a criminal. He was a man destroyed by pain, transformed into something he never should have been. Ricardo, Lucas began, trying to find the right words. Justice isn't something we can take into our own hands. When we do that, we become the same as those we condemn. But there's still time to stop, to prevent more deaths. But before Ricardo could respond, the sound of a gunshot echoed through the factory, and the lawyer's body staggered backward, collapsing to the ground with a dull thud. Lucas froze, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He rushed to Ricardo, but it was too late. Blood quickly spread across the floor, forming a pool around the motionless body. In a panic, Lucas looked around, searching for the shooter. It was then that he saw, from a distance, a shadowy figure disappearing into the darkness of the factory. The real vigilante, the person Ricardo had protected, had betrayed him at the last moment, eliminating him before he could surrender or be arrested. Lucas felt a mix of horror and despair. The case had become even more complex, and the true killer was still on the loose. The pursuit of justice had taken a tragic turn, and the detective knew that the next step would be the hardest of all. But he also knew that, despite everything, he couldn't give up. The real vigilante was out there somewhere, and Lucas would do whatever it took to find them, even if it meant risking his own life. Lucas remained kneeling beside Ricardo's body, the metallic smell of fresh blood filling the air. The detective's mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The shadowy figure that had vanished into the darkness, the real vigilante, was now a bigger mystery than ever. Who were they? What was the true extent of their revenge? He looked at Ricardo's lifeless face and, for the first time in years, felt a deep sense of defeat. But something in the lawyer's expression seemed different, almost serene, as if, in some way, he had known it would end like this. Lucas tried to push the thought away, but it lingered, like an unsettling shadow. As he stood up, he noticed something shining on the ground near Ricardo's body. A small key, partially covered in blood. He picked it up, examining it closely. It wasn't an ordinary key. Its edges were worn, as if it had been used countless times, and a number was engraved on the metal, 27. Not sure what to make of it, Lucas pocketed the key, sensing that it was more than just a mere object. It was a clue, a remnant of the mystery Ricardo had left behind. But where would that key lead? And why did Ricardo have it with him at that moment? When Lucas finally left the factory, the sound of police sirens was already echoing in the distance. He knew the scene would soon be swarming with officers, reporters, and onlookers, all eager to understand what had happened. But the truth, Lucas thought, was something no one there was prepared to uncover. As he walked down the deserted street, the city around him seemed shrouded in a cloak of silence. The cold early morning wind blew, carrying with it the feeling that something was coming, something Lucas couldn't quite identify. He couldn't shake the sense that the vigilante was one step ahead, guiding him toward a fate he didn't yet understand. And then, in the distant horizon, a faint light began to shine. A red light, blinking intermittently, flashing in the rhythm of Morse code. Lucas stopped, his heart racing as he realized it was meant for him. The key in his pocket seemed heavier now, as if it were pulsing with a life of its own. He knew the night wasn't over. The light blinked one last time before disappearing into the darkness, leaving Lucas with more questions than answers. And as he walked toward that new lead, one thing was certain. The real game was only just beginning, and he was about to enter a labyrinth of shadows where each step would take him deeper into the mystery. The vigilante was still out there, watching, waiting. And Lucas knew that to uncover the truth, he would have to face his own demons, risking everything he believed he knew about justice, revenge, and what it meant to be truly human. The key, the number, the light, all pointed to something Lucas wasn't prepared to face, but knew he could no longer avoid. Because, in the end, the vigilante's shadow wasn't just the shadow of a man. It was the shadow of a secret he feared to uncover. And that key, the key now burning in his pocket, was the door to that dark secret which was about to be revealed.